The gun was already pointed at his chest when Malik raised his hands. 12 minutes ago, he had only stepped out to get his suitcase. Now the air between him and the officer vibrated, breath, metal, and command. No one spoke. The flashlight trembled in the officer's grip, the beam cutting Malik's face into halves, one seen, one judged. Somewhere behind the silence, a radio crackled. "Unit 12, do you need backup?" The officer's mouth didn't move. His pupils were wide, rimmed with panic he didn't yet recognize as his own. Malik's pulse sounded inside his ears like footsteps running the wrong way. He wanted to speak, to say his name, to point to the badge hanging from the strap of his bag. But language felt like movement, and movement felt like danger. The street light above them flickered twice and steadied. For a second it painted both men in the same sterile glow, two shapes held apart by training, by history, by the weight of someone else's fear. Then the light dimmed again as if refusing to witness. 12 minutes earlier. The same light had been a soft halo over quiet asphalt when Malik's car rolled to a stop. The neighborhood looked arranged rather than lived in. Lawns disciplined, mailboxes polished, silence curated. His GPS announced, "You have arrived," and fell mute, leaving the hum of the engine to fill the cold. He sat for a moment, hand resting on the key, watching his own reflection in the windshield. A tired face, travel-creased shirt, the hint of a smile that came from surviving another day of introductions. Tomorrow he would report for orientation, a new position, a new start. He told himself that was enough. He turned off the engine. The stillness that followed felt disproportionate, as if the entire block had paused to confirm the interruption. From across the street, a porch light blinked on. A woman, white, older, wrapped in a cardigan, watched from behind the railings. Her hand lifted to her phone, a gesture small enough to be deniable. Malik opened the trunk, retrieved his suitcase, and set it carefully on the curb. The click of the latch echoed longer than it should have. He glanced toward the house he'd rented. White siding, empty porch, the kind of place that existed between occupancy and vacancy. A paper note on the door read, "Keys under mat. Welcome, Malik." Even in the handwriting, something apologetic. Inside, the air smelled of detergent and disuse. He placed the suitcase by the couch, hung his jacket over a chair, and laid his ID badge on the table. Malik Green, logistics coordinator. His proof of belonging. He traced the letters with a thumb, an old habit from job interviews and airport checkpoints alike. Through the curtain slits, he saw the same porch light still burning across the street. He told himself it was nothing. He'd traveled enough to know that in some neighborhoods, a black man arriving alone was still a headline waiting to be written. But knowing didn't make it simpler. He breathed slow and deliberate, as if calm itself could serve as a form of armor. The heater coughed to life. The refrigerator hummed. The ordinary noises tried to claim the space to make it human again. He unpacked a shirt, plugged in his phone, scrolled to a message from his sister. "You there safe?" He typed back, "Yeah. Quiet place. Starting tomorrow." He didn't add that he already missed the noise of home, the sound of people who didn't look twice at him. Outside, a car passed, then another. Somewhere a siren whispered and faded. He stood at the window, watched the streetlight pulse, and thought of the presentation he would give in 2 days. Efficiency metrics, cost reduction models, things that made sense. He wanted to live inside things that made sense. Behind him, his phone screen dimmed. Across the street, Mrs. Hanley, he would learn her name later, spoke quietly into her phone. Her voice carried a mixture of uncertainty and conviction. "There's a man outside," she said. "I think he just got here." "No, I don't know. He's still out there." The dispatcher's reply was routine, practiced. "We'll send someone to check it out, ma'am." Malik stepped outside again, searching the trunk for the folder he'd forgotten, the one with his resume copies. The air had cooled further and each breath came out white. He leaned in, found the folder, straightened. A cruiser turned the corner, headlights washing over the street like interrogation lights in a dream. He froze, folder in one hand, the other gripping the trunk's edge. The cruiser slowed. The engine deepened its tone. "The flashlight came next, slicing the night, locking on his chest, sir," a voice barked. He turned slowly, both hands visible. The officer stepped out, posture squared by habit, the holster already half drawn. "Step away from the vehicle." Malik obeyed, pulse quickening, folder slipping to the ground. He tried to speak. "It's my rental officer, I just arrived." But the words tangled behind his teeth. The flashlight's glare made everything faceless. The command came again, sharper. "Hands where I can see them." He raised them. The badge around his neck swung forward, catching the light for a moment before vanishing back into shadow. The officer's eyes followed the motion but didn't register it. Another silence. A mechanical one, built from decades of policy and instinct. The radio hissed softly. The streetlight flickered. The night held its breath. Malik's shoulders ached from holding still, from trying to measure each second against the possibility of survival. Somewhere, the officer's finger tightened fractionally on the trigger, trained muscle responding to invisible fear. Neither of them moved. In that breathless distance between action and restraint, something enormous and unseen pressed down on both of them. The weight of the system, the history inside the badge, the stories that always started the same way, and above them, the same streetlight shuddered once more as if refusing to look. The locker room smelled of metal and disinfectant, an odor that never left even after the janitors scrubbed the floors and sprayed lemon-scented polish along the benches. Officer Daniel Kearns buttoned his shirt without looking down. The motions came from muscle, not mind. One button, pull, tuck, adjust the belt. The steel buckle gleamed under the fluorescent light, an artifact polished daily out of habit, not pride. He reached for the body cam next. The small red light blinked once when he switched it on, a single pulse, quiet but absolute. He clipped it to the center of his chest, feeling the subtle weight of its presence. Always recording, always watching. It was meant to protect him, though he could no longer remember from whom. Across the room, a radio played low from someone's locker. A talk show host debating the city budget. Voice clipped, factual, already fading into static. Kearns didn't listen. He was thinking of the day's schedule, the list of patrol sectors, the half-hour break slotted between calls, the thin thread of routine that kept everything from collapsing into chaos. He checked the weapon last. He didn't think about what it was, only what it needed to be. Functional, safe, dependable. The slide clicked back with a clean sound, sharp as breath. The weapon wasn't personal. It was policy. The department called it standard issue, language designed to remove the idea of choice. He holstered it, straightened, and looked at himself in the narrow mirror on the locker door. The reflection showed a man assembled rather than alive. Mid-30s, lean from duty but softened by repetition. The uniform did most of the speaking. His eyes had long ago learned how not to betray exhaustion. He looked down again at the camera's blinking light. The rhythm of it was steady, like a small artificial heartbeat. Red. Pause. Red. Pause. He adjusted his posture. Shoulders back, chin level. The stance felt professional, though he didn't remember what that word meant anymore. Professional, he had learned, was what you became when you stopped asking why. The call came while he was halfway through his coffee. Unit 12, suspicious male outside residence, 247 Eastfield. Routine. He wiped the rim of the cup with his thumb and set it aside. The dispatcher's voice was calm, neutral. It carried the tone of a weather report. He'd heard the phrase suspicious male so often that it no longer meant anything human, just a signal to move. He replied automatically, "Copy that. 12 en route." The words left his mouth before thought could intervene. Outside, the parking lot shimmered faintly under the sodium lights. His cruiser sat waiting, white and blue, decals gleaming like emblems of certainty. He opened the door, slid into the driver's seat, and shut the rest of the world out with one solid click. The dashboard lit up in cold green. He typed the address into the onboard console and the map blinked alive, thin blue lines, a pulsing waypoint. He drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the radio mic. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, quiet in the way only orderly places could be. Porch lights marked the houses like sentries, standing watch over their identical lawns. The tires hummed against the asphalt. Each intersection blurred into the next. Stop sign, driveway, silence. His mind moved in tandem with the car, mechanical, efficient, emptied of everything except procedure. A voice broke through the radio again. Caller reports unknown subject walking near residence. Possible vehicle involved. No further. He acknowledged it the way he always did, short, clipped, emotionless. 10-4. It wasn't fear that crept in. It was something colder, a narrowing of attention. He'd been trained to read potential in motion, to see patterns before they became threats. The Academy had called it situational awareness, but what it really meant was suspicion-made instinct. Every gesture, every hesitation, a calculation. He glanced once at the mounted camera feed. The small display showed only his hands, the faint glow from the dashboard reflecting off the metal badge pinned to his chest. The red recording light blinked in rhythm with the streetlights as he passed them, an unintentional synchrony between man and system. He turned down Eastfield. A long row of houses, all quiet, all watching. Somewhere a dog barked, then stopped abruptly. The air was crisp, suburban, stripped of sound except for the cruiser's idle hum. He slowed the car. There, mid-block, a vehicle parked under a flickering streetlight. A silhouette moved beside it. Male. The dispatch words aligned neatly with the image before him as if the scene had been waiting to justify the call. He stopped the cruiser, foot steady on the brake. For a few seconds he simply watched, the figure bending slightly into the open trunk, retrieving something. His pulse didn't change. His training didn't allow it to. He reached for the mic. Dispatch 12 on scene. Static. Then acknowledgement, he opened the door. The night air bit at his face, cold and flavorless. His boots met the pavement with the measured rhythm he'd been taught to maintain. Authority without aggression. The hand on his holster wasn't fear, wasn't even precaution. It was procedure. 1,000 repetitions carved into the body until they became reflex. The flashlight clicked on, beam slicing through the dark. The man turned. For half a heartbeat, both of them froze. Inside his head, Daniel heard the voice of the instructor from the academy, the one who'd walked the rows of trainees like a priest among believers. Hesitation gets you killed. You see hands. You see threat. You control the scene. He had repeated it until it became gospel. Now the words replayed themselves, not as instruction but as justification. The man's hands were visible, but the folder in one of them made the image messy, uncertain. Control the scene, the voice urged. He drew the gun. The sound of the holster snapping open was sharp enough to fracture the night. He didn't shout yet, just aimed. Both hands firm, elbows locked, stance textbook perfect. The flashlight trembled slightly and he hated the tremor because it made him feel human again. The man froze, eyes wide but silent. For a second, Kern saw the reflection of his own body cam light glowing in those eyes. Red, steady, recording. He heard his own breath inside the silence. It came out ragged, uneven. Nothing like the calm professionalism the reports would later describe. He wanted to say something neutral, procedural, safe. He wanted the script, but all that came was, "Don't move." The words echoed against the houses, flattening into the air like an order no one believed in. He held the aim, rigid, waiting for his pulse to obey him. Waiting for something, anything, to tell him that this was still a normal call. The night offered nothing. Only the hum of the cruiser engine behind him and the flicker of the streetlight above. And under it all, the quiet realization that the red light on his chest would see everything, except the part of him that had already begun to break. The cruiser stopped with a hard hiss of brakes. Headlights carved through the dark and landed on Malik, catching him mid-motion, half bent toward the open trunk. The light flattened him, turned him into a silhouette of possibility. His own shadow stretched forward like an accusation he hadn't spoken yet. He straightened slowly. The folder in his hand slipped and hit the ground with a soft, paper-heavy sound. It landed in the white beam, pages splaying open, words reduced to pale rectangles of light. The officer's door opened. One sound, one hinge, deliberate, step away from the vehicle. The voice carried nothing human. It was the voice of training manuals and legal briefings, of a system that taught men to sound certain when they were afraid. Malik blinked into the light. "It's my— Step back!" He obeyed, palms visible. His breath rose in small clouds that hung in the beam, turning each exhale into proof of life. He tried again, softer this time. Hands where I can see them," he raised them. The cold bit at his fingers. The badge on the lanyard around his neck swung forward, glinted, and caught the light for a heartbeat before it was swallowed again by glare. The officer advanced, flashlight in one hand, the other hovering near the holster. His steps were practiced, heel, pause, toe, each one meant to own the space. The radio on his shoulder murmured background noise, Codes, traffic, a dispatcher asking for confirmation. He didn't answer. Malik could hear the low engine idle behind the officer, a steady hum that felt like the world refusing to stop. Somewhere far off, a dog barked, then the night sealed itself again. Time stopped behaving like time. It began to stretch, seconds widening until they became rooms. In one of those rooms, Malik remembered every lesson he had been taught about survival. Keep your hands up, move slow. Make your voice calm even when it shakes. But none of those lessons had ever mentioned what to do with silence that refused to listen. He looked directly into the light, though it burned his eyes. "Officer, please." "I live, don't move." The words struck him harder than a shove. He could see the officer's jaw tighten, a muscle flickering beneath the skin. The faint reflection of the body cam light blinking red. Recording. Red. Recording. Malik realized that the camera was not there to see him. It was there to confirm procedure. The air between them thickened. Breath became the only sound. A white mist formed and disappeared over and over, marking the space between accusation and defense. He felt his arms start to ache. The body has its own way of reminding a person how long guilt can last. Kern's finger brushed the trigger guard. He didn't want to, but his hand moved anyway. Years of drilled-in reflexes turned thought into muscle. His mouth tasted like metal, his throat dry enough to crack. He could hear his own pulse beating against the radio mic. The figure in the light was motionless, yet everything about it seemed alive. Too alive. Unpredictable. His training told him that unpredictability was threat. His gut told him it was a man. The two truths collided in his chest. He spoke again, louder, to fill the distance. "What's in your hands?" "Nothing," Malik said. His voice was steady, deliberate, but it carried exhaustion instead of defiance. The officer's flashlight dipped, caught the folder on the ground. Papers shifted in the wind, edges glowing white. They were printed forms. Employment contracts, photocopied IDs, logistics schedules. Kearns didn't see that. He saw movement. The paper fluttered. The gun lifted. 12 minutes. That was all the time the world would later measure. In the first minute, authority asserted itself. In the second, fear answered. By the third, both men understood they were no longer speaking to each other but to the systems standing behind them. Malik lowered his head slightly, not as surrender, but as the instinct of someone who knows that suddenness kills. His badge glinted again. He hoped it would speak where words could not. It did not. The officer saw the movement, not the meaning. He tensed. "Keep your hands up!" Malik froze again, the badge swinging in the light. He wanted to say, "It's my name, my job, my right to stand here," but even language felt like a threat now. The silence grew heavier than sound. It pressed against the houses, filled the spaces behind curtains where neighbors watched but did not act. Inside those homes, lights glowed faintly blue from television screens. News anchors spoke in muted tones. No one turned up the volume. A gust of air moved between them, lifting the papers at Malik's feet. One sheet caught on the bumper of his car, fluttering like a signal. For a moment, Kearns's eyes followed it and something faltered, an awareness that none of this looked like danger. But once a man has drawn a gun, every doubt becomes a threat. Malik saw it happen, that micro-shift in posture. He understood it instantly. The fear wasn't of him, it was of losing control. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. "You don't have to do this." Kearns' grip tightened. "Stop talking." The command cracked the air. Malik did stop. Not out of obedience, but because words had become useless currency in a market that only accepted compliance. They stood like that. Two figures locked inside a system that refused to acknowledge either of them as human. The radio finally broke the stalemate. "Unit 12, status check." The officer didn't answer. He couldn't. The sound of his own breathing filled his ears. He was afraid that if he spoke, the tremor in his voice would betray him. Malik's hands trembled now from the cold, the strain. He lowered them slightly to keep them visible. The small shift made Kearns' gun twitch upward again. "Don't, please," Malik said, one word. The plea hung between them, clear, bare, irrefutable. Somewhere far down the street, a door opened. A figure stepped onto a porch, phone in hand. The light from the screen reflected off glass, another layer of witnessing that would change nothing. The flickering streetlight buzzed once, a dying insect sound. The flashlight beam wavered, then steadied, cutting again across Malik's chest. The badge caught it one last time, flaring gold. Neither man moved. 12 minutes had passed. The radio clicked again. The voice sharper now. Unit 12. Confirm. Kearns blinked as if waking from a trance. His gun lowered by an inch, just enough to let gravity reassert itself. His breathing returned in ragged pulls. He saw the folder on the ground, the ID badge glinting at its edge, the proof of what he'd refused to see. Malik didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence filled the space where explanation used to live. The night resumed its ordinary sounds, the hum of the engine, the creak of trees, the steady, merciless rhythm of the recording light. From a distance, the scene looked simple. A man with raised hands, another holding a gun, both illuminated by a single, indifferent light, but the street remembered differently. It remembered breath turning to steam, fear turning to procedure, and truth, flickering, human, fragile, denied its chance to speak. And somewhere behind the glass of every darkened window, the world watched and did nothing. The neighborhood had gone still, the kind of stillness that follows intrusion. No one had planned to witness anything that night. They were drawn to it, pulled quietly by the pulse of blue and red light that leaked through curtains and across driveways. Mrs. Hanley was the first. She stood at her front window, blinds angled so that only one eye could see out. Her breath fogged the glass in small rhythmic bursts. The light from outside turned her face pale, almost translucent. She didn't move closer, didn't step away. She only watched. Through the slats, she could see the dark shape of the officer, the raised hands of the man. She told herself she was too far to hear what was being said. That was true, but it was also convenient. Words would have made her responsible. Silence kept her safe. The phone was already in her hand. Not the one she had used earlier to call about a suspicious car, but her other phone, the one her daughter had given her, sleek and white, with a cracked corner. Her thumb hovered over the camera icon. For a moment she thought of recording, of having proof, then she lowered it. Proof was dangerous when you were the one who had started it. Across the street, a teenager stood on the porch in bare feet, the glow of his phone lighting his face blue. His name was Aaron, 16. He had started filming without thinking. The lens shook slightly as his hand trembled, but the image was clear enough. The man with his hands up, the officer's gun steady in the frame. He kept zooming in as if clarity could mean control. His mother's voice called from inside the house, a sharp whisper that tried to sound calm. "Aaron, get in here." "Just a minute," he said. The minute stretched. He had seen videos like this before, so many that they had become a genre of fear. But seeing one happen through his own screen made it different. The world inside the phone and the world in front of him had merged, and he didn't know which one was real anymore. When his mother came to the door, she didn't yell. She just touched his shoulder and pulled him back. The video kept recording on its own. The phone forgotten, lying face up on the porch. The image wobbled between sky and ground, capturing only fragments. The hem of the officer's coat, Malik's shadow against the car, the white of his palms reflecting light. Inside her house, Mrs. Hanley turned away from the window. The blind snapped shut. She told herself she didn't see anything wrong. She told herself the officer was only doing his job. And yet her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She made tea because that was what she did when things felt uncertain. The kettle hissed, and she thought about the sound of Malik's car when it had first arrived. How the engine had hummed softly, how he had parked neatly, how she had noticed him because he didn't seem to belong. The word belong echoed, small and shameful. She poured the tea too fast. It spilled over the edge of the cup, staining the counter. She watched it spread, thin and brown like something trying to seep away before it could be cleaned. The dispatcher sat in front of a row of monitors, each one flickering with calls and codes, her headset pressed against her temple, the hum of multiple voices merging into static. She was on her 8th hour of shift, hands moving in practiced efficiency. "Unit 12, status check," she said into the mic. Static, then breathing. She marked the call as pending verification. Around her, the room was silent except for the quiet clicking of keyboards. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. It was a place built for neutrality. White walls, gray desks, no windows. The kind of space where decisions didn't feel like actions. She leaned back in her chair and rubbed her eyes. Somewhere in her mind, a thought tried to surface. What if this one matters? But she pushed it down. It wasn't her role to wonder, only to record. Neutrality, after all, was the first commandment of her work. On another monitor, a red indicator blinked. Body cam active. She didn't look at it, not yet. There would be a report later, a timestamp, a sequence of justifications written in calm, administrative language. Down the street, a man opened his garage door halfway and stood in the dark, the light from the cruiser reflecting off the metal tools behind him. He held a beer in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't film, didn't call, didn't speak. He told himself that what was happening wasn't his to interfere with. The beer tasted flat like guilt. He took a sip anyway. In every house, the same silence repeated itself, each person watching, each telling themselves that someone else would act. It was a harmony of restraint, a chorus of non-intervention. Malik's stillness was visible from almost every angle. It looked like surrender, but it wasn't. It was the only power left to him, to refuse to move, to refuse to perform fear the way they expected. The neighbors would later remember his posture, though none of them would describe it the same way. Some would call it calm, others defiant. None would say dignified, though that's what it was. Inside the cruiser, the dashboard camera blinked red. Its lens took everything in. The officer's stance, the quiver in his arm, the faint sound of Malik's voice. The machine saw what no one wanted to name, but cameras, like witnesses, only collect. They do not intervene. Later, when the footage was reviewed, it would show the entire event without interruption. 12 minutes compressed into a file small enough to email. The sound of breath, the flicker of a badge, the voice of a man saying please, all preserved, archived, neutralized. Mrs. Hanley sat on the edge of her couch, tea untouched, TV muted. The images outside her window kept replaying in her mind, unfinished. She thought of opening the blinds again, but she didn't. Instead, she whispered something no one would hear. He didn't do anything. Her voice broke on the last word, not from sadness, but from recognition. She had been the first to call. Aaron's phone continued recording until the battery died. The last frame caught a flicker of movement, light bending, a badge gleaming, a shadow shifting, but no resolution. The final image froze mid-breath, as if time itself refused to finish. When the video later appeared online, it would be titled simply, "Man Detained in Suburban Street, Viewer Discretion Advised." People would watch, argue, forget, but the street would remember. From a distance, the scene had become almost peaceful again. No one moved. The cruiser lights painted the houses red, blue, red again. Through 1,000 small acts of observation, the system held itself intact. Windows, screens, lenses, all facing outward, none reflecting inward. And in that cold suburban quiet, complicity had never sounded so polite. The air had thickened to something physical, dense enough to slow thought, heavy enough to bend sound. Even the streetlights seemed to hesitate, their glow stretching too far and not far enough. Malik's arms ached from being raised so long. The muscles had gone past burning into a numb, weightless tremor. His palms pointed toward the cold sky, fingers stiff. The badge around his neck shifted with each shallow breath, swinging like a pendulum that refused to keep time. Officer Kearns could hear the metallic click of his own pulse inside his ears. He didn't lower the gun. Couldn't. The barrel hung in midair, anchored not by will but by habit. His training had taught him about escalation, about posture, about command presence. None of those manuals had ever told him what to do when the fear was his own. The radio crackled again, the voice of the dispatcher, steady, detached, procedural. Unit 12 confirmed status. Kearns didn't reply. He couldn't separate his breath from the sound of that voice. Malik moved, just slightly, a reflex more than intent, a shift to ease the strain in his shoulder. His right hand tilted, fingers still open, still visible, but movement was all the system ever needed. The flashlight jerked upward. The gun followed. A rush of adrenaline swallowed thought whole. "Don't move." The command cracked, not as authority but as plea. Malik froze. Again. The silence that followed was worse than the shout. It filled the entire street, pressing into windows, into the dark spaces between houses. Somewhere a porch light flickered once and went out. Kearns saw everything in fragments now. The badge, the ID card, the papers on the ground, the reflection of his own arm extended. The scene fractured like glass, every shard showing a different truth. He blinked. The red light of his body cam pulsed in the corner of his vision. Each blink a heartbeat, each heartbeat a record. He saw his own reflection in the cruiser window, split by the glass, distorted by the angle. His face looked hollow, drawn, unrecognizable. For a moment, he didn't see a man. He saw an institution looking back. Malik's voice broke the air again, quiet, careful, a sound shaped for survival. "Please, I'm just reaching for my ID." The words were deliberate. He said them like instructions, a reminder that humanity still existed here somewhere beneath the noise. He began to move, slow, visible, open. The badge swung again. A rectangle of plastic, ordinary and absolute. Kern's eyes caught it this time. The name, the company logo. The photograph slightly faded at the edges. A man on his way to work. Not a threat, his breath hitched. The gun wavered. His right hand trembled so violently now that the flashlight beam jittered across Malik's face, across the car, across nothing. He tried to speak, to tell Malik to stop, to tell himself to stop, to tell the night to stop. But the words came out as something broken. Wait, one word, the kind that arrives too late to mean anything. The sound of Malik's ID hitting the pavement was soft, almost apologetic. It landed beside the folder, papers shifting again. The lanyard's metal clip caught the wind and clinked against the car door. That tiny sound undid something in Kearns. It was so ordinary, so alive, so unforgivable. He saw now what he hadn't wanted to see. The ring on Malik's left hand, the faint outline of travel dust on his shoes, the wear on his jacket cuffs. Evidence of a life that had never belonged to a police report. His gun arm dropped by a fraction. Just enough to let truth enter. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry." But the words would have meant confession, and confession was not protocol. Instead, he stepped back. The sound of gravel under his boots felt deafening. Malik didn't move. He didn't trust what came next. For the first time, Kearns looked at the gun as if seeing it for what it was. Not an extension of law, but an inheritance. A tool polished by repetition, justified by paperwork. A thing that turned seconds into verdicts. His reflection in the cruiser window trembled along with the gun's barrel. In the glass, two figures overlapped, the officer and the man who wanted to stop being one. For a moment, he thought about lowering it completely. He imagined the relief, the release of weight. But then the radio spoke again, sharp, cutting through the fragile quiet. "Unit 12, confirm. We're sending backup, backup." The word carried implication, correction, containment, control. Kearns exhaled hard. The breath left him like surrender. He clicked the safety back on, slow enough to hear the sound. Metal sliding against metal. Decision against redemption. Malik's arms stayed raised. He didn't dare misread the gesture. The officer's voice came next, strained, uneven. "Stay where you are." It was all he could manage without admitting defeat. The street lamp flickered again. The light pulsed once, twice, and then steadied, painting the asphalt in its tired yellow wash. The lanyard swung one last time and came to rest against Malik's chest. Its photo stared upward, catching the beam, reflecting the face of a man who no longer fit the narrative unfolding around him. Kearns stepped closer, not out of control, but because stillness had become unbearable. He looked down at the badge, then at Malik's eyes. "I didn't," he began. The sentence never finished. There was no language for realization that arrives too late. He holstered the gun. The motion felt mechanical, meaningless. It was not redemption, only reprieve. Malik's arms dropped slowly. The weight of gravity returned like judgment. He didn't look at the officer, didn't thank him, didn't speak. His silence was deliberate, an indictment sharper than any word. Kearns stood there, breathing in the space where violence had almost happened. The sound of his own exhale filled his chest with shame. He could feel the body cam still recording, documenting his shaking hands, his uneven posture, his humanity resurfacing like evidence of error. He wanted to turn it off. He didn't. Some truths deserved to remain visible. Backup sirens began to rise in the distance, soft, then louder, then everywhere. The red and blue lights bounced off the cruiser windows, splitting his reflection into fragments again. In one shard, he saw the officer who had followed orders. In another, the man who had almost destroyed a life. Malik leaned against the car, steadying himself, his breathing shallow but measured. He looked smaller now, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen too late. The sirens drew closer. The street was about to fill again with noise. with paperwork, with explanations. For a moment, both men stood suspended in the brief, unbearable space between mistake and consequence. Then Kearns turned away. The motion wasn't cowardice. It was collapse. The lanyard moved again, caught by a faint wind. The badge gleamed, pale gold in the streetlight. The gun hung heavy at Kearns' side, the echo of its tremor still alive in his hand. He stared at it, at the tool that had defined his authority, realizing too late that it had also defined his blindness. When he finally looked back toward Malik, the man hadn't moved. His silence still held deeper than accusation, wider than forgiveness. And as the backup lights flooded the street, turning everything sterile and official, Kearns understood the cruelest truth of all. The system hadn't cracked. He had. The precinct at night was a factory of light, sterile, relentless, unmerciful. Fluorescent tubes hummed above the bullpen like something mechanical breathing. The air smelled of toner, burnt coffee, and old policy. Officer Daniel Kearns sat at a steel desk under that humming light. The screen in front of him glowed pale blue, reflecting in his eyes, bleaching them of color. A blank incident report blinked on the monitor. The cursor pulsed like a heartbeat, slow, steady, waiting to be obeyed. He hadn't spoken much since returning. The other officers had filled the silence with procedural chatter about jurisdiction, dispatch logs, public response management. None of it reached him. He was still hearing the sound of the safety clicking back on. Across the room, Lieutenant Graves was talking to a departmental lawyer, a woman in a charcoal suit with eyes like polished steel. She nodded as he spoke, taking notes in neat, compact handwriting. Every line she wrote was a line of protection. "Contain the narrative early," she said. Graves nodded. "Already flagged the body cam. We'll review in-house before external." "Good." The words hung in the air like disinfectant spray, efficient, odorless, meant to neutralize. Kearns looked back to the screen. He typed incident report, field interaction, civilian engagement, then stopped. The blinking cursor seemed to breathe, a small mechanical reminder that hesitation wasn't part of the process. He began again. At approximately 22:34 hours, this officer responded to a dispatch regarding a suspicious male individual in a residential area. He paused. The phrasing came easily. Memorized, pre-approved, ethically insulated. He kept typing. Upon arrival, officer observed said individual exiting a vehicle and behaving in a manner that appeared evasive. He remembered Malik's face in the light. Calm, deliberate. Still, there had been no evasion, only existence. Still, he didn't delete the word. Verbal commands were issued. The subject complied. No discharge occurred. He stared at that line. No discharge occurred. 4 words that erased 12 minutes of fear, humanity, and almost tragedy. 4 words that would make the report sound successful. He kept typing. Backup arrived on scene. Situation de-escalated. No further action required. That last phrase, "and no further action required," was the system's blessing. It turned crisis into paperwork, morality into formatting. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Each second sounded like approval. Tick, oh, incident contained. Tick, and narrative aligned. Tick, conscience deferred. Graves walked over. "You almost done?" Kearns nodded. "Yeah, just finishing the summary." Graves leaned on the desk, reading over his shoulder. "Make sure you mention you followed standard engagement protocol." He hesitated. "Sir," Graves's eyes didn't leave the screen. "It's not about what you meant. It's about what's defensible." He said it calmly, almost kindly, then walked away. Kearns stared at the cursor again. The screen's light made his hands look bloodless. He typed the sentence. Officer maintained proper distance and followed standard engagement protocol. He deleted it, then typed it again. In the conference room next door, the lawyer was walking a supervisor through the communication plan. Her voice carried through the half-open door. "We'll classify it as a procedural stop, not an altercation." There was compliance. There was restraint. "That's the message. Public complaint?" someone asked. "Handled through standard channels." "And the subject?" "Released without incident, without incident." The phrase repeated itself like an incantation, stripping meaning from fact. Kearns could see them through the glass wall. 3 people seated around a long table, their faces lit from below by laptop screens. They looked like surgeons mid-operation, performing moral triage with steady precision. He finished the main body of the report. The language read clean, almost elegant. No injuries sustained, no force applied. Subject was cooperative. Case closed pending supervisor review. Each line erased the tremor in his hand, the quiver in his voice. The way Malik's silence had looked more dignified than his authority. He reached the section titled, Officer Reflection, Optional. Most officers left it blank. He stared at it for a long time. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then, almost against his will, he began to type. The subject did not resist. The subject did not threaten. The subject was only standing there. He stopped. The words pulsed on the screen, raw, out of place. He knew he couldn't leave them. They would raise questions, draw attention, require explanations. He deleted them. The cursor blinked again, patient, unjudging. Later, a sergeant came by to collect his statement. You good, Kearns? Yeah. Solid restraint tonight. Could have gone sideways? Yeah. The sergeant clapped him on the shoulder and walked away. The gesture was meant as comfort. It felt like burial. When the report printed, the paper came out warm from the machine. He held it in both hands, the way a man might hold a confession he didn't write. The black ink gleamed faintly under the fluorescent light. The words "no discharge and no further action" looked almost holy. He signed at the bottom. Officer Daniel Kearns, badge number 5172. The signature didn't look like his own. It looked practiced, detached. In the hallway, the supervisor was already filing away the paperwork. He slid it into a folder marked Routine Field Reports, Q4. The sound of the drawer closing was final, bureaucratic, absolute. Another folder went on top of it. And another. And another. The weight of them together was how the system remembered. Kearns stayed seated long after everyone had gone. The lights above him flickered once, the faint buzz growing louder in the empty room. He stared at the monitor, now dark. His own reflection stared back, faint, fractured by the glossy screen. In it, he saw the same image he had seen in the cruiser window. A man split down the middle, half law, half conscience, neither whole. The cursor still blinked faintly on the blank field of the second page. He reached for the keyboard as if to add one more line. Something honest. Something small, he typed. The light was too bright. He stopped, then deleted it. The cursor blinked once more, indifferent, eternal, and then the screen went black. From outside, the precinct looked silent, ordinary. The parking lot was empty except for a single cruiser, its windshield reflecting the faint yellow glow of the street lamp. Through the glass doors, the reception desk was visible, clean and unattended. Behind it, a clock ticked. Inside, every document was filed, every phrase calibrated. The system slept easily, fed and untroubled. And in the darkened office, a single report sat on a desk, a monument to a night that had almost meant something. The morning arrived without ceremony. The same street, the same trimmed lawns, the same hum of distant engines, all of it exactly as it had been before. Only the air felt different. Officer Daniel Kearns drove slowly through the neighborhood, his cruiser moving at the cautious speed of someone approaching a memory rather than a place. The sun was barely up, pale and unwilling. Dew glimmered on the hoods of parked cars, catching light like small, unearned absolutions. He turned onto the same street. No police tape. No markings. No trace that anything had happened here. The asphalt looked clean, as if the night had washed itself away. Malik's rental car was gone. The driveway where it had stood was empty now, just a rectangular patch of darker pavement. The short-term rental house looked anonymous again. Blinds drawn, porch swept, a wreath of artificial leaves hanging neatly on the door. Kearns parked across from it and killed the engine. The silence that followed was total, the kind that reveals itself only after machines stop. He sat there for a while, hands still on the wheel. The streetlight at the corner flickered, a weak, irregular pulse. It had done the same thing last night, though he hadn't noticed it then. Now in daylight it looked exhausted, as though it had kept watch through the entire night and found nothing worth illuminating. He stepped out of the cruiser. The morning air bit through his uniform. Somewhere a lawn sprinkler started, rotating with soft mechanical rhythm. No one looked out of their windows. No one drew a curtain or paused on their porch. The neighborhood had already returned to normal. A word that meant forgetfulness, not peace. He walked toward the curb where Malik had stood. The gravel still bore faint impressions, the scuff of boots, the small indents of shifting weight. He crouched for a moment, running his hand over the spot. There was nothing there, of course. Only the ghost of presence. In his mind, he could still see it clearly. Malik's hands raised, the lanyard swinging in the wind, the light cutting across his face. That image had lodged itself behind his eyes, repeating without sound, without mercy. He had gone home after the report but hadn't slept. The body obeys fatigue. The conscience does not. Across the street, Mrs. Hanley was on her porch watering her plants. She saw the cruiser but didn't recognize him without the lights. She waved, a small automatic gesture, then went back to her routine. Kearns nodded back out of instinct. The motion felt obscene. She didn't know or pretended not to. He couldn't tell which was worse. He walked to the spot where the papers had scattered. A few scraps still clung to the curb. Not from last night, but they looked close enough. He knelt and picked one up. It was a grocery flyer, half damp from dew. He folded it once and placed it in his pocket as if returning something sacred. He looked up. The street stretched out in both directions, empty, perfect, forgetful. He felt the strange urge to apologize, to the air, to the asphalt, to the indifferent morning. He leaned against the cruiser, the metal cold through his uniform. His reflection in the window looked different now, less divided, more hollow. The glass distorted his face, bending it around the curve of the car door. For a long moment he just watched himself. No weapon in his hand, no radio, no command voice, only the quiet breathing of a man who had seen too much and learned too little. The sun climbed higher, catching the edge of his badge. The glare made it unreadable. He thought about driving to the station, about turning in his report again, adding something, a note, a sentence, anything that would tell the truth. But he knew how that would end. The truth had already been processed, filed, archived. The system didn't keep space for conscience. It kept records. He remembered the lawyer's voice in the meeting room. Contain the narrative early. It echoed now like scripture. He looked up at the sky, the same colorless expanse that had hung over last night's lights. The only difference was that daylight didn't hide anything. It simply refused to care. A car drove past, a woman in a sedan on her way to work. She glanced at the cruiser, then away. The same reflex as everyone else. Recognition avoided in the name of order. He envied her. That privilege of passing by something terrible and keeping your morning intact. He stayed there another few minutes, staring at the spot where Malik had stood. The image of the badge appeared again in his mind. Not the one on his chest, but Malik's. The faint photo. The company name. The proof of belonging. He could still see it catching the light, trembling, insisting on its truth. He had ignored it. Now it was the only thing he could see. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, carrying the faint sound of traffic from the highway. The world was resuming itself, indifferent and intact. He walked back to the cruiser. The reflection followed him. Two men in one frame, both diminished. For a moment, he placed his hand on the door handle and hesitated. He could imagine an alternate version of himself. One who had listened, who had seen, who had stepped back before fear turned into instinct. But imagination didn't change paperwork. He opened the door and sat inside. The seat was still warm from the drive. The smell of vinyl and old coffee wrapped around him, familiar, suffocating. The dashboard light blinked once as he turned the key. The engine came alive with a low, obedient hum. That sound, constant, procedural, reliable, reminded him of the system itself. Always running, always self-correcting, always pretending nothing had happened. As he drove away, he caught one last glimpse of the streetlight in the mirror. It flickered again, that same weary pulse. A signal with no message. He imagined Malik somewhere else now, unpacking his suitcase, sitting at a breakfast table, pretending the night hadn't followed him. He hoped that was true. The cruiser turned the corner. The houses disappeared. The hum of the engine merged with the morning traffic, swallowed by the ordinary rhythm of the day. Behind him, the street fell silent once more. The same silence as before, polished, functional, absolute. And somewhere between the engine's steady noise and the flicker of light fading in his rearview mirror, Officer Daniel Kearns finally understood what the report had failed to say. Nothing had been resolved, only continued.